The panic in Gotham City was palpable, a suffocating tension that gripped every street corner and alleyway. The disappearances of children, all from the poorest areas, had the city in a chokehold of fear. The police, stretched thin and out of leads, offered hollow reassurances to the terrified families. But their words rang empty. Deep down, everyone knew this was beyond their reach. It was only when Commissioner Gordon reached out to me that the real search began. I met Gordon on the rooftop of the GCPD, the bat signal cutting through the dense smog that hung over the city. The weight in his voice matched the grim expressions etched into his face. He detailed the cases with precision, every missing child, every desperate parent. I listened, absorbing the information, my mind already racing. Once the briefing was over, I returned to the Batcave, the roar of the Batmobile's engine echoing in my ears. The reports Gordon provided were spread out across my desk. Every photograph, every statement told a story of anguish. Patterns began to emerge as I pieced together the puzzle. All the children came from neighborhoods close to Gotham's labyrinthine sewers. The connection was undeniable. This was more than just coincidence. It was a trail, a grim breadcrumb path leading into the city's underbelly. I decided to begin my search at the most recent site of disappearance. The streets were eerily quiet when I arrived, the kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. I moved carefully, scanning for anything out of place. But there was nothing, not a footprint, not a scrap of fabric, nothing. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed these children whole. I moved on to other sites, chasing shadows and whispers. Frustration mounted with every dead end. And then, finally, a break. In speaking with one of the families, I learned something chilling. Every child who had vanished had mentioned seeing a clown near the sewers before they disappeared. My thoughts immediately went to the Joker, but I dismissed it just as quickly. He'd been locked away in Arkham for months, under the highest security. This clown, whoever it was someone else entirely. The sewers were my next step. I prepared meticulously. I wouldn't underestimate this foe. The tunnels were as oppressive as I remembered, the stench and darkness pressing in from all sides. My footsteps echoed, the only sound in the suffocating silence. At first, the search yielded nothing, but then, faintly, a sound. Laughter. It wasn't the Joker's manic cackle. This was different, deeper, with a sinister undertone that sent a chill down my spine. I followed it cautiously, every muscle tense. The laughter grew louder, more mocking. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My eyes caught a movement in the shadows, and I moved towards it, only to find a red balloon. It floated innocently, incongruously, in the filth of the sewer. I reached out, examining it, when the laughter resumed, closer this time. It echoed around me, disorienting, coming from everywhere and nowhere. And then I saw him. A clown stood in the darkness, his painted face stretched into a grotesque smile. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the unease clawing at my chest.
"Pennywise,"
he said, his voice dripping with malice. I pressed him about the missing children, but he only laughed. That sound! It burrowed into my mind, a sound meant to unravel. Anger surged, and I lunged, but my fist met empty air. Pennywise reappeared behind me, his eyes glowing with predatory delight.
"I can taste your fear, Batman,"
he hissed. I threw a batarang, but it clanged uselessly against the sewer wall. Pennywise wasn't just elusive. He was something else, something other. His laughter grew louder, and suddenly, I was no longer in the sewer. The air changed, thick with the scent of polished wood and old memories. I was in the opera house. Not just any opera house, the opera house. The last place I'd been with my parents. My breath caught as I saw them, sitting in their seats, my younger self between them. I ran towards them, shouting, but they didn't hear me. They stood, and walked out through the back door. I followed, bursting into the alley behind the opera house. The night air was cool, but my blood ran hot with panic. There they were, just ahead. My mother's pearls glinted in the dim light. My father's arm was protectively around her. I reached out, but I couldn't close the distance. Then the gunshot. The sound tore through me, a visceral, shattering noise. My parents crumpled to the ground, their lifeless eyes staring up at me. I screamed, but no sound came out. And behind me, I felt him, Pennywise. His laughter, his presence, was suffocating. I turned, ready to fight, but he was gone. The alley was empty, save for the echo of his laughter and the hollow ache of loss that would never leave me. The nightmare was far from over. There I was, kneeling on the cold, damp street, the memories of that alley still raw in my mind. The sudden shift back to the dark sewer was jarring, like waking from a nightmare only to find yourself in another. It took me a moment to steady myself. The grief, that crushing, relentless grief, weighed on me, sapping my strength. Pennywise's laughter still echoed in my ears, a mocking reminder of how easily he could manipulate my deepest fears. I forced myself to stand. I had to move. Standing still in this place felt like surrendering, and I couldn't afford that. A few steps forward and the ground beneath me trembled, a low, guttural rumble rising from the darkness ahead. The vibrations grew stronger, the sound swelling into a crescendo of chaos. Then they came, bats, hundreds of them, swarming from the shadows. They engulfed me, their wings beating like 1,000 tiny drums, their screeches piercing my ears. Instinct took over and I ran. My boots splashed through the filthy water as I pushed forward, heart pounding like a war drum. It felt like an eternity before the swarm dissipated, leaving me gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I'd run a marathon. My heart was racing, each beat a painful reminder of how close I'd come to losing control. I leaned against the slick wall, willing myself to calm down. I couldn't stay here. Every moment in this sewer was a step closer to Pennywise's clutches. But the maze of tunnels seemed endless, each path a mirror of the last. It was as if the place was alive, shifting and twisting to keep me trapped. Pennywise wanted me broken, wanted to feed on my fear, and he was succeeding. The air changed, a subtle shift that sent a chill down my spine. When I turned the next corner, I wasn't in the sewer anymore. I was in Wayne Manor. The familiar halls stretched out before me, eerily quiet. The silence was broken by a cry for help, a desperate, anguished sound that sent me sprinting toward its source. I found him in the study, collapsed on the floor. Alfred, my Alfred. I dropped to my knees beside him. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. Alfred, I whispered, my voice trembling. Before I could do more, that laugh, that horrid, grating laugh, rang out again. I spun around, my fist clenched, and there he was. Pennywise stood in the doorway, his grotesque grin wider than ever. My rage boiled over, and I charged at him. But no matter how hard I fought, no matter how precise my strikes, I couldn't touch him. He was a phantom, a cruel joke made flesh. Exhausted and gasping for air, I paused, glaring at him. He tilted his head, his eyes glinting with malicious delight.
My turn.
He sneered. His attack was relentless. Blows rained down on me, each one harder to dodge, each one sapping my strength. One strike sent me sprawling to the floor, and when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the manor anymore. I was in a desert, the heat pressing down on me like a smothering blanket. The horizon stretched out endlessly, broken only by the jagged remains of collapsed buildings in the distance. As I trudged toward them, I realized with a sickening lurch that I knew this place. The ruined skyline wasn't just any city. It was Gotham. My Gotham, desolate and lifeless. I called out, my voice echoing in the empty streets, but there was no answer. Then, from the sky, something crashed to the ground with a deafening roar, sending up a cloud of sand. Shielding my eyes, I waited for the dust to settle. When it did, I froze. Superman stood before me. But this wasn't the ally I knew. His eyes burned with anger, his stance menacing. "You," he growled. "You're to blame for all of this." I tried to explain, to apologize, but he cut me off. "You abandoned us. Darkseid came, and you ran." Before I could respond, he attacked. His speed, his strength, it was overwhelming. I barely managed to evade his blows, my mind racing for a way to reason with him. But there was no reasoning with whatever this was. Just as he was about to land a killing strike, the world shifted again. I was back in the sewer, the stench and darkness enveloping me like a shroud. Pennywise stood in front of me, his grotesque face inches from mine. His eyes burned with an unnatural light as he stepped closer, his every movement deliberate, predatory. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. Fear clawed at me, raw and unrelenting.
"You're afraid, Batman?"
he said, his voice a sickly sweet whisper.
"I can feel it."
I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself, trying to think. But my mind was clouded, the oppressive weight of his presence suffocating. He moved closer, his smile widening as he fed on my terror. I could feel myself slipping, my resolve crumbling. This was it. The battle wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Pennywise was winning, and as his laughter filled the air, echoing endlessly, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever escape? Or would I become just another victim, lost forever in his twisted world?